Hey, my name is Gavin Burgess, and welcome to Hostetler Precision Ag. We're at Kent and the guys' shop here, just outside of Andrew, Iowa. We're with the Cornelius Seed Group. I'm with Precision Planting, and today we're going to kind of go through a planter and what's it take to get ready for spring. What do we need to look at? What do we have to get ready? How do we make sure we have all the parts and everything ready and in stock so you guys have a successful spring and you get that great emergence and that stand that you're looking for. All right, hey, we're going to dive into this row unit here now, and we're going to really talk about what are some of the major components that you guys need to be looking at before you go to the field so that we make sure we get that best stand we can. First thing I always check with a grower when I talk about planters is, do we have nice and tight parallel arms? A lot of our planter brands out there today, some of the weaker links on them are these parallel arms because they have one bushing that is pressed into either these upper or lower arms, and they wear into that metal and cause that row unit to be loose. So a great way to check that is to come back here behind this row unit and see, do I have any slop or play in these? The old adage used to be a ½ inch of play. We were good. But as we moved into that, we now have learned that as we put those row units into the ground and we pull forward at 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 miles an hour, the more loose play we have in here, the more vibration we send into that row unit shank and that meter, and our seed delivery is going to be majorly affected by that. So as we think about that, we want to make sure these row units and these bushing systems are tight up here and that parallel arm does not give any slack or vibration back into that row unit. So some of the things that are out there today to help you guys do that is there's a number of kits. Precision Planting has come out with a kit that is a double bushing parallel arm kit like you see on this planter, to where it has a hardened outer bushing with a soft inner bushing in it. And when we do that, as we wear this planter and we wear those parallel arms, all we're going to replace is that soft inner bushing. We're never going to have to replace these big metal parts anymore. Makes it a lot easier on you guys to update those every year and service them, but also keeps this row unit tighter longer. So it's less service year over year as we are going through these planters to make sure they're ready for spring. As we think about the next step, we look at our gauge wheel arms. We want to make sure they're attached really well. We've got them shimmed up, that gauge wheel nice and tight against our disc openers. Best way to check that is as we raise that gauge wheel up, we want to make sure that we've got good contact with our disc openers down there, so that as we're moving across that soil profile, we're keeping that dirt from getting down inside that trench. We don't want that dirt coming inside between that disc opener and that gauge wheel, causing dirt to fall down in our trench, or mud if we get into a wet condition. So we want to constantly be shimming and making sure that those are tied up against there. Big things to check: make sure your gauge wheels are really good. The rubber is not worn, it's not eaten up or chewed up from that ground. We want to make sure it has a nice crisp edge on the inside so it is running against that disc smooth. The big thing as we think about adjustment and shimming and moving those in and out is really, again, making sure that that's tight against there. As we think about wear on those planters, this gauge wheel arm style, like a John Deere or Kinsey, as it's being a pusher, really wants to pull out away from that. So shimming that up against there to keep that tight is a crucial step almost on a daily basis, if not every other day, as you're going across the field. As we think about those arms, some of the other parts to look at is really where this mustache in here wears into the top of that arm. We want to make sure that we don't have a big divot there, which is causing a depth difference with our T-handle and where we set that depth of our disc openers. So with this setup here, you're actually seeing Precision Planting and just came out with this. We're going to bolt that bushing on there, and then this little sleeve or gauge wheel arm of the sleeve slides over the top of that. It actually has a wear point down here, and we simply loosen this. We slide that tight up against that disc, and we tighten it back down, and that's our adjustment. So there's no screw or shimming that we have to do with that system. It's simply all on its own to get that thing adjusted correctly. All right, the next step we're going to talk about is those disc openers inside of there. Disc openers are some of the most important things because they're creating the depth at which we're planting, right? We're setting that T-handle and they're cutting that trench for that seed to get to the bottom. And we want to make sure that good Cornelius seed gets to the bottom of that trench so it grows and emerges together throughout that whole growing season for you. So as we think about those disc openers, the old adage is a ½ inch of wear, they need to be replaced. And that's still today. That's a crucial part of that. When they get worn less than ½ inch, they're wearing so that we can't shim them together properly and utilize them moving forward. So you need to measure your disc openers every year to ensure that they are no more than a ½ inch wore from their original width. This deer planter here is a 15-inch original disc. 14.5 is going to be worn out on it. So we need to replace that. Now, I will warn you, there are way different levels of, different quality levels of disc openers out on the marketplace today. We can go into any shop and order disc openers, but I challenge you guys to check those. One, you want to check to make sure that disc is not warped. So lay that on a flat surface, make sure it's smooth, and make sure that that disc is not warped at all. The other thing is you want to check that hub. You want to make sure the hub is actually centered in that disc. The best way to do that is stick it in a vise and spin that disc to see, and then put a screwdriver or some type of square up against the outside edge of it. Spin that disc and see if that disc moves away from that screwdriver or back to it. If it moves too much away and back to it, that means that hub is not centered in the center of that disc, and you're going to have a very poor trench as you're going across as those discs spin in that ground. You could create a W bottom, which is going to cause that seed to be misplaced, as well as have air pockets around it, because our closing wheel system is not designed to close up a W trench. When it comes to those disc openers, the other thing to check is to check and see that the bearing in the hub is also centered and set into that hub well. If that bearing is starting to go out, or that bearing is not set in that hub square, you also get a wobble to that disc. So when that's going across the ground, those discs are not able to wear. We actually want to see that there's 30 thousandths or less of an error on those discs when we spin them. So we want to make sure that they're nice and solid as those discs are being spun, that they're true to being centered on there, and the bearing is centered in that hub. Very crucial parts to making sure we're creating a good V-trench with those disc openers as we put them on there. Alrighty. Hey, the next step we're going to talk about here at Hostetler Ag and with the Cornelius seed folks, when it comes to getting that planter correct, is really planting depth, right? It's a crucial part of what we're going to do on a daily basis going across your fields. We hope you guys are digging every day to ensure that you're planting into that moisture line with that seed, because that's the crucial part. We need heat and moisture to germinate a seed. And so as we think about going across our fields, we're going to dig in every field that we get to and understand that soil moisture line. Is it a hot day? Is that moisture line going to be going down? Is there rain coming and we may have some extra moisture coming? How deep do we want to plant that seed to ensure that it's going to germinate at the same time and come up out of the ground together? One of the crucial parts on a planter to make sure that you have set correctly is your depth. So we can set our depth based off of the book, and at 4 and 5 on a John Deere row unit is typically where we would say that's 2 inches of planting depth. But in all reality, guys, that's not the truth. We have wear points within the point from this T-handle here down to where our gauge wheels are going into the ground. And so as we think about those wear points, just for instance, we let our disc openers wear a ½ inch before we replace them. If that's the same setting here as it is with a new disc opener, to where we're now letting it wear a ½ inch, and every one of our notches is a 1/4 inch of an adjustment, we're actually 2 notches off from actually planting at 2 inches of depth. So as we think about that, one of the things I want to challenge everybody to do is to calibrate the depth on your planter. So how are we going to do that, right? What's the way of calibrating that depth? What you're going to do is really just take a very simple tool like a 2x4, and you're going to raise that planter up, and you're going to put a 2x4 under each side of your gauge wheel. And when you do that, you'll set that planter back down, and you're going to allow that thing, you're going to take that T-handle, and then you're going to push it down until it stops. And that would be your 1.5 inches, because right, our 2x4s today are an 1.5 inches thick. So when we do that, that allows us now to be set at our 1.5 inches, and we know where that 1.5 inch mark is. If you want to calibrate to 2 inches, you can sure do that. You just need to have 2 inches of board thickness or material thickness to measure that to. So when we bring that back down and we set that in there, now we know that on this year, 4 and 5 are 2 inches for this row. But the row right beside it, it may be 5 and 5, where we're at 2 inches. So you may have them across different. But all in all, guys, our ultimate goal is to get everything planted at the correct depth And if we know exactly where that calibrated depth is, we can adjust each row specifically to getting that planter and that seed correctly planted in that moisture depth. All right. Hey, Gavin Burgess with Precision Planting. Welcome you back here. I want to talk through meters as we think about getting ready for planting season. We want to make sure that that's the heartbeat of your planter. You want to make sure that as you're going across the field and you're planting that Cornelius seed, that we're getting out one seed per cell or one seed per flight of our finger meter as we're going across. We know that seed spacing and that performance of that seed is really maximized when we get one of them out there every 4.5 to 6 inches, depending on that spacing and population we want in our field. So as we think about those meters, what are some things that we really need to worry about as we put that seed in the hopper to make sure it's going to have a good day coming out of there? One is to make sure when we're thinking about finger meters, there's a lot of mechanical parts in these, and we want to make sure maintenance is done on these on a yearly basis. With all those moving parts, mechanical parts, and the springs and everything in them, we got to make sure that those things are ready and up to snuff, so that every time we grab a seed out of that seed pool in the meter, that it's going to deliver it down that belt and down the seed tube correctly. So we recommend yearly maintenance on these, running them on a test stand, such as Precision Planting's Meter Max Ultra stand, at our dealers like here at Hostetler Ag, and any dealer you may have in your area. But as we run those meters, they're going to test those to see, do we have good spring tension? Are the fingers strong enough to continue to deliver a seed down that seed tube? Are the belts in there good? Or maybe the adjustable brush. So that way when we have those different seed sizes and shapes, we can adjust specifically to those to make sure that that seed is coming out of there one at a time. Those are the important things on this finger meter that we have to worry about. Now when we jump up to those vacuum meters, we do get a little bit more freedom. There's not as many moving parts. But as we think about those, we want to make sure that, again, we're still only getting one seed per cell. We don't want doubles. We don't want skips. So as we take those, there are some things we want to check out in our vacuum meters to make sure that they're going to be functioning correctly. Maybe it's that singulator. Is it floating on that disc, depending on the style of meter you have? Is it going to take off those doubles when we're picking them up out of that seed pool? Or is the vac seal up to snuff? Maybe it's starting to get worn out, getting some dry rot to it. We need to replace that. Now, the other thing when we think about meters in general is lubrication of these meters. We want to make sure that all those moving parts in there are also being taken care of. With those finger meters, as we look at those, one thing we want to put in with our seed when we're doing that is graphite. Graphite's an important part of lubricating not only that seed flow from our hopper, but also graphite helps that moving parts in our meter to ensure that it's staying lubricated and can deliver that seed out. When it comes to that vacuum meter, we actually have to take it one step farther. We still like to use graphite in there to lubricate that seed, whether it be in a bulk fill system or a box system. But we also use that graphite for flowability of seed in our meters and get those out. But the other part of a vacuum meter to remember is, just like when we vacuum at home, it creates static electricity. The static electricity will hold those seeds on those plastic or polymer discs for fractions of a second longer, which cause spacing errors in our field and causes loss of yield. So as we think about those static electricity, we like to add talc into our graphite mix for those seed. So we have not only flowability, but also the elimination of that vac and that static electricity in there. So that seed is being dropped off of that disc right at the timing it needs to be to keep that spacing at the ground, because that meter is only grabbing one at a time. So as you guys think about getting those meters ready, as we sum up this, we want to make sure that we do our finger meters every year and vac meters at least every 2 to 3 years to ensure that you guys are going to be getting that one seed out every time we ask that meter to do that. All right, hey, this is Gavin Burgess with Precision Planting again. I want to talk about one last thing on these planters as we think about that pass across the field, and that's the closing pass. The ultimate job of a closing pass is to do what? It's to act like that planter never went across that ground. Your good day to know that your closing system did a great job for you is that it's hard to find seed. So one of the tools we wanted to talk about here that we've kind of worked with different companies and developed to help us kind of give us a better idea where our closing performance is is what we call our closing lockup tool. Cornelius Seed has these available for you, so get with your local rep, he can get you some. But as we think about that, what it allows us to do is lock up that closing tail to keep that trench open and evaluate how well of a job we're doing placing seed from that meter and that spacing performance, but also to compare the row unit beside it where the closing wheel is still down and engaged and one where the sidewalls are going to be left intact, to see, are we eliminating those sidewalls fully to ensure that that seed is having the best day. It's enveloped by moist soil to where it is completely set up to germinate and come up at the same time all of its neighbors. And that's the job of our closing system, again, to eliminate any pass. So here you can see that closing lockup tool set up on this row unit here. We hook it under the back of our tail, we take our T-handle out and we allow it to go slack, and we hook it up in here. And so we can now evaluate that whole profile. We can take our seed diggers, we can touch the sidewall to see how soft of a sidewall we've created, or did we create compaction with our gauge wheels up front or anything else in front of that row unit that went across that field. So as we think about it, we want that nice mellow soil back here. I'm going to be able to touch that sidewall so it fractures and falls in, and that we have that seed, no air pockets around it, completely engulfed in that moist soil like we talked about. As we think about the closing wheel system, one of the bigger things to keep in mind is what kind of closing wheels should you be running? As we've done 15 to 20 years of research in closing wheel studies, we've found that cast closing wheel systems have really been prevalently more yield than others because they have a little bit more weight. And I think we figured out why. Over the last few years, we've really done a study of sitting our closing wheel tails on some scales to see what kind of spring pressure we get when we put that T-handle into the different notches. And we're finding that there could be up to 40% variance from row to row in that spring tension in the same notch setting. When we think about 40% spring tension difference, you're talking upwards of 15 to 20 pounds. So as you think about that, and you've only got a 3-pound rubber wheel on the back of here that could be getting extremely less pressure, closing those sidewalls out, we may not have enough pressure there to close that system out. So what's happening with those cast systems is, I believe it's helping hold down that tail and being more engaged with the ground as it's going across those different conditions across your field. Whether it's that wet spot on the field, maybe it's that dry timber soil, or that heavy clay that you're dealing with. But we've got to keep that closing wheel system engaged. So as you think about that, as you have those challenging conditions in your field, is your closing system going to stay engaged with that ground? Or are you going to have that system be light and possibly not staying engaged? Keep that in mind as you guys are evaluating your closing wheel systems this spring, and make sure you get one of these closing lockup tools. They make evaluating that really handy.